Hello and welcome to the Supernatural panel here on Continual. I'm your host, Gail Z Martin, and tonight we are talking about multiple apocalypses, compassion fatigue, and maintaining hope. But before we launch into that pretty big topic, let's let our wonderful panelists introduce themselves, starting with Kristin.
Hi, my name is Kristin Jackson. I'm a graphic designer, working mostly freelance contract, a lot of work in the film industry. And I've been a follower of Supernatural since the very beginning and am looking forward to talking about the show and various sorts of aspects of the show tonight.
Okay, Hansi.
I'm Hansi Oppenheimer of Screen Projects, and I study pop culture. I'm an oral historian, so I've interviewed a lot of fans. Supernatural is it's a film. It's a show you can keep coming back to because you can always get that message of compassion and everything. Is the whole theme of the show, like this, forgiveness, and so especially during times of trauma, it's a really comforting show to watch.
Yeah, it's funny because it was really basically pitched as kind of this horror show, but it's everybody's comfort favorite. And there are a lot of reasons for that, which we'll talk about, but it might not be what you first think of when you read the description of, two brothers in a muscle car hunting down demons and killing ghosts. I fell in love with Supernatural halfway through season 11, binge watched 11 seasons in 4 months for the start of season 12. Fell completely down the rabbit hole, and anybody who knows me knows I have not seen daylight since and hope I never do. I proudly claim the title of obsessed fan, and that's why we've done over 200 Supernatural panels just here on Continual. So, multiple apocalypses. We live in interesting times at the moment. And sometimes it feels like, you open up your news feed and it's like, what fresh hell is this? Oh, didn't see that coming. Plague of locusts. Well, got to cross that off.
Alien, sure, why not?
Right. At this point, aliens might be an upgrade. I mean, it's been a weird couple of years, and this year seems to be saying, here, hold my beer. The Winchesters certainly were no strangers to that. So there was the first apocalypse in the show, and then we had several. What's your thought on how the multiple apocalypses, I think that's a noun that probably isn't supposed to be plural.
Apocalypse.
Apocalypse. Shaped the show and the characters. Kristin?
Oh my gosh. Well, since the brothers had to sort of face trauma in their lives from very early on, it sort of prepared them to be trauma survivors and to be the people who could not freeze like rabbits and could take action no matter what was thrown at them, whether it was demons and yellow-eyed demons and crossroad demons and all sorts of demons, kings of hell, Lucifer coming back to earth. You have the darkness. I mean, it was just relentless for those guys. And I think that they were sort of two brothers that were, foretold to be these chosen heroes, but they were also uniquely qualified to fill the roles they did. That's just kind of my 2 cents.
Hansi?
Yeah, I mean, their whole mission is about saving people. I mean, they're giving up their lives to save people. They could just, deal with their own trauma off by themselves, but they don't. They push themselves past their trauma and try to save other people from going through that. And, you really see it, especially when there's a kid in the show, the way they handle the kid. And I mean, they're very compassionate to the people they deal with and help.
Yeah, I mean, they they're kind of the ultimate first responders, because they're not just responding to normal traumas and catastrophes like tornadoes and fires and car accidents. They're dealing with the kind of things that most people sleep well at night because they don't know even exist. So they're dealing with vampire nests and werewolf packs and, you know, the pissed off sister of God. And so it is literally one damned thing after another, usually very damned, because there's the king of hell in there too, and oh yeah, Lucifer. So it's a they fall back on family, they fall back on friendship, they fall back on purpose and having a sense of, I might not be able to fix everything, but I can fix this one thing. I can save this one person. I can stop this little bit of evil in this corner of the world, which I think is a good lesson to learn, because nobody can take on everything that's bad in the world, but everybody can take on a little piece, you know, and make a difference. And as you know, Kristin mentioned the freeze and fight. There's that freeze, fight, flee, and fawn, and the Winchesters just default to fight. Sometimes even when they really should flee, they dig in and fight. And I think that's one of the most hopeful things in the show, is that even when they've already dealt with a lot of crap, somehow they find that resilience to fight the bad stuff and fight just getting up in the morning, because that's its own.
How many times have they like had to fight each other, where one of them was demonized, you know, in various different episodes, and one was trying to kill the other, but the other like always like stood by, tried to save them, would do what, you know, there was always, they never like gave up on them.
At least not for very long. I mean, they might have even tried
Yeah.
a little bit once or twice, but it never stuck, and they never could stay away from each other. And they never really did give up altogether, which I think is one of the most hopeful things in the show. To have somebody in your life who would still love you and try to save you if you were a black-eyed demon with the mark of Cain on your arm, you know, or the perfect vessel for Lucifer.
And they also had, you know, it was, even though these apocalypses on the show were very apocalyptic in scope, a lot of people are dealing with similar apocalypses right now. You have flooding on the East Coast that's, you know, just record floods that nobody has seen before. You have those derecho storms that just plowed through Chicago. You have heat waves and, you know, fire tornadoes out west. It's, and so people are experiencing some of the most traumatic things that you can experience in their lives. And even though it may not be demon involved or the darkness and Amara and all that type of, you know, people that generated, but you are dealing with the loss of everything, the loss of your home, the loss of friends, the loss of family. And so watching a show like Supernatural, where you have the two brothers, despite everything they've lost over all these years and multiple times, they keep losing over and over. They still get up and they still face the day, and they still keep plowing forward, no matter what gets thrown at them. And that's a, like Gail says, that's a very hopeful message disguised in a really terrible, terrible package.
Mm-hmm. And how many of the demons that, you know, or, you know, people they've worked with that they hated at the beginning, that they begin to understand and, you know, befriend and, you know, care about.
Yeah, or like the men of letters, you know, they came in and they were bad guys and they were good guys and they were just kind of middle of the road guys.
And then they were
like us, you know? So, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that comes up a lot in the show, is that with very few exceptions, very few characters are 100% evil or 100% good. You know, you have a couple exceptions like Lucifer, who could never quite kick the habit. But most people were a mix, and most creatures were a mix. And, you know, I think one of the things that's interesting in Supernatural is a lot of their crises, they could say, oh, that's Chuck misbehaving, or, oh, that Crowley caused that. While we poor mortals in the real world are going, oh, heck, there's another tornado. If there's nobody to blame it on, if that makes it feel any better.
It makes you feel better because you see it happening and it feels like there's a reason.
Yeah, I mean, through all of human history, people have blamed it on Zeus or blamed it on somebody, because then at least it gives you something to do. You can take an offering to the shrine and, you know, hope that your grapes are good enough that Zeus won't send the tornado to your house next. And just having something to do helps in that moment, even if it really doesn't change anything. I think one of the things that's so hopeful with Sam and Dean is that they actually could make a difference with these vastly more powerful elements, where little old mortal us, we're just kind of stuck with it. But they could go battle the darkness. They could go deal with God.
Come save me.
Well, or not in Chuck's
yeah, or not.
Yeah, maybe not. Even Amira like ended up being really likable at the end. Like I really dug her. I thought she was so cool.
Hey, all she wanted to do was go to a spa and have a massage. Her brother blew up her masseuse. I mean, I'd be pissed too.
But it's kind of funny that you mention that, because to me it seems like Chuck, out of all the characters, became more unlikable as the seasons went on.
Absolutely.
Everybody else became more likable except for him. He went backwards.
Oh, and Metatron.
And Metatron. Oh gosh, no, don't even. Yeah.
Yeah, Chuck turned out, but it's the monster at the end of the book. They're telling you right there, like it's right there when you know. Like,
yeah. But you're right. We did get to see redemption arcs for pretty much everybody except Metatron and
even Metatron Chuck might have gotten a little. Didn't he get a little redemption?
A little comeuppance. Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe not as much as we wished on him at different times, but a little. So compassion runs through the whole 15 years of Supernatural. Nobody's paying these guys to do what they do. They're constantly putting their lives in danger. They stay in crappy hotels. They eat road food. And they fight monsters. And most of the time when they roll out of town, nobody even knows that they did it. And yet the whole basis is saving people. So how does that compassion shape the characters? And where do they find the wellspring to get up and do it again tomorrow? Kristin?
Yeah, I would say with the brothers, it would probably be stemming from Dean and his relationship, or his remembered relationship with his mother. Because, you know, they had such a bad father figure. It was so terrible. And the contrast with Mary, and his memories of her taking care of him and making him sandwiches. And he sort of carried that compassion for a little kid into, you know, his relationship with Sam. And then how he dealt with other people who were facing terrible, you know, experiences that they had no preparation for, whether it was a Wendigo or, you know, werewolves or something. And Dean kind of moderated from the early seasons and became more compassionate. And Sam was kind of the person who was raised with a brother who was very compassionate for him. And so he kind of was, I think, in a lot of ways, Dean's Dean's little guidepost for how to have empathy for somebody else in a terrible situation. Yes, they don't know how to, put a salt circle around themselves. They're running around. They're not prepared for a ghost or a witch or anything. So he became more compassionate for people experiencing those terrible things. And I think it helped them when they were thrown into the really deep end in the later seasons. Because now they were kind of the people that had to figure it out, whereas before it was just the average guy that they were helping out that needed to figure things out.
Yeah, that's a good point. They started out being the experts, the people who knew about stuff in the shadows that nobody else knew about. But by the time we get into the later seasons, they're running into things that nobody has dealt with in maybe 1,000 years. There is no, it's not in their dad's journal anymore. Bobby hasn't done this. And so they really have to step up and become the experts in something that there's no guidepost for. There's no rule book. Hansi?
It's funny because one of the episodes I was watching is where Dean is dealing with Sam being a demon and asking him, like, are you going to be okay if we go fight? And Sam's like, yeah, I can control myself, and so for the first time, Dean's kind of looking at it as like the gray area, like they may be monstrous, but they may be redeemable. And that for him, that's a change because he had a pretty black and white, like kill monster. So I thought that was interesting that he came around because he loved his brother.
Kill monster, but not Sammy.
Not
Sammy. Yeah, I think that watching that growth in the characters, and I'm so glad the show let us go there, because there have been so many shows that were good shows, but from episode 1 to the last episode, no matter how many years the show ran, the characters never grew. They were the same people, whether they were hunting, criminals or whatever they were doing, they never changed. And
true.
Sam and Dean changed a lot. Not only did they, grow up on the show, because there's a big difference between early 20s and late 30s, but we got to see their worldview evolve. And they threw out some things that they had been taught, and they learned some things that John never dreamed of. And it changed them, but it didn't make them bitter and angry and vicious, where John's experience changed him. We assume that he was a good father and a good husband before he got vengeful, but it was always only about the vengeance for him. If he saved some people on the way, well, it was the opposite of collateral damage, but it was always about getting the yellow-eyed demons. And the boys had a bigger worldview than that. They weren't just single-minded. It was first and foremost saving people and then tackling the big existential crisis of the week, of which there was a new one every week. But I think we've all felt like the term wrestled with God, is there for a reason, whether you're actually thinking you're wrestling with a deity or you're just wrestling with your past, your personal demons, literal or not. We don't judge. But Sam and Dean did literally wrestle with God, wrestle with demons, deal with, all of these
angels.
Yeah. Struggling with an angel, kind of biblical proportions here. And I think at 3:00 in the morning, in the hour of the wolf, we've all kind of felt like we've done that too. So what do you think the characters learned from those personal apocalypses, as well as, the ones shared with the rest of the world? Kristin?
Oh, geez. Come back to me. I got to think on this one. That's okay. A big question.
Hansi?
Well, there was an episode I watched today that I was thinking of. It's the one where Dean is sent back to the beginning, and he sees, that his mother is this kick-ass, you know, Hunter, she's not, you know, baking pies and cookies. She's not, you know, but she's awesome. He says she's awesome. And, you know, he meets his father and everything, and he's placed in this town that, you know, and there's nothing he can do about it to save them. But I think his understanding of the family at that point, it was like, we're always going to save each other. My mom did whatever she could to save John, and we'll do the same thing.
Yeah, I think as the years went by, not only did the bond between Sam and Dean just become unbreakable because they had been through so many things. And if you can get over your brother being Lucifer and your other brother, you know, being a demon for a while, but he got over it.
But he was funny.
There's really not much you can't get past. And they got each other through that as well, and saved the world in the end of the episode too. So I think it's just interesting that probably the hardest area they had struggling with compassion was for themselves. Both of them really struggled with forgiving themselves for what they did when they were possessed or hexed or under a spell, you know, which are arguably rougher circumstances than the average person faces. But still, they more readily forgave each other and the people around them than they did themselves. That took a lot longer until we finally get to hear Dean say, I'm okay with who I am, and I'm okay with who you are, and I let that stuff go a long time ago. And I don't know about you, but when I heard him say that, I just felt this breath of relief. And it was like, yes, you guys are really going to be okay if you can get to that point. Back to you, Kristin.
Yeah, I think that Sam might have had an easier time of forgiving himself. Dean seemed to carry that for season after season after season, and it just piled on worse and worse. And he was drinking himself into oblivion. And I think that the compassion for each other is what kept Dean from completely going over the edge. And he had to be there. He felt the obligation and the sense of duty, but not necessarily the being able to forgive himself. And he internalized so much. He internalized a lot. And I think Sam had an easier time of saying I'm sorry or looking to be the person to extend the hand in many cases, not all cases, of course, but in a lot of cases. And it took Dean a lot longer to come to terms with being a compassionate for himself that he was for other people.
Yeah, because
so
John
much responsibility so young, right? I mean, go ahead, please.
And John turned all of his angst into rage, and it all went outward. We didn't really get a lot of insight into John's, you know, interior life. It all seemed to just blast outward. Sam, you know, I can see Sam sitting there reading all the psychology books and trying to figure himself out, although they don't usually cover some of those situations. And Dean just blamed himself for everything and turned it all inward. And I think, you know, you kind of see three major coping mechanisms. The show's not a psychology handbook, but we sure got a lot of it along the way. And those are, you know, kind of three primary ways people deal with catastrophe and trauma. But it's also a really hopeful show. Again, I go back to the fact that this scary show about monsters is people's comfort show during personal trauma. People don't usually say that about that kind of show. It's a weekly horror show, but it's what, you know, got people through, you know, quarantine. And that's the hopefulness. So where do you see the hope springing from? Kristin?
Yeah, I think it's just, you know, people dealing with adversity and situations where, like you said, you have no control. You have no control if, you know, you're in the path of a tornado. You have no control over flooding. You have no control over things. And you look at Sam and Dean, and they were, overwhelmed and had to figure it out and deal with it and make plans. And I think it's a helpful thing because you see people coping, and you also see people learning to make plans for things. But contingency plans. We've got preparation. You open the back of their Impala and it is full of preparation. And they are prepared to face just about anything that gets thrown at them. And in a way, that kind of gives you an ability to deal with the things that you're dealing with. Maybe I can't deal with losing a job, but I can save a little money aside in case there is something that happens and I need money in a heartbeat. Or you see people coping and dealing and preparing, and it gives you the hey, I can do that. It's not near as traumatic, but I can do that in my own life. And like you were saying, it's just little things you can do, just little things that make a difference in your own life. And seeing somebody just deal with really terrible stuff, and yet they get through it, and they're back next week to keep on plugging away. That really is something that you look forward to seeing.
Okay, Hansi?
I think the show is a really good example of trauma. And if you have PTSD or CPTSD, you can relate to a lot of, both the apocalypses and the learning curve and like how to handle it. And because they're, they're C plus PTSD. I mean, and they're managing it in their own ways, like Dean keeping it all inside for a while, and Sam trying to like learn and research and talk. So they all have their ways of handling it, which I think are good examples for people who are traumatized, which I think pretty much everybody is at this point.
Yeah. Well, and sometimes it was the little things. It was like Dean getting a piece of pie or Sam getting a chance to read a book. Sometimes it was getting together with a friend like Jody and Donna. That time that Sam and Dean ate dinner at Jody's.
Oh, I love that one.
And Dean was just going on and on about what a great dinner it was, and she says, Dean, it's just chicken. But how many times they didn't have Sunday chicken dinner growing up, so I think they both learned to find comfort in little things like that were controllable when the whole rest of the world was outside their control, even when they were at ground zero for dealing with the apocalypse.
Or even like a smaller, a more relatable thing, like the season 1 ending with the car crash. People have that every day. And being in the hospital room and with somebody who is gravely injured, and watching them find a way to communicate with each other. Well, maybe you can't do that, use a Ouija board to communicate with the spirit of your relative, but the fact that they woke up and you have the father and this saying goodbye, and it's something that you can watch and take away your own relatable message from.
Well, and I think that even though they had their tiffs along the way, underneath it all, in the long run, they never lost faith in each other. And even when they lost faith in themselves, the fact that the other person didn't give up on them gave them hope. And how many times did one or the other of them say, I'm not accepting this. I'm not going to let you do that. I reject that. No, you can't. And that brought them back when one or the other of them was, really at the end of their rope and had thought they had run out of resources. I think my favorite scene with that is when Dean was dead set on going in that Malik box, and you get that wonderful scene by the side of the road where Sam is saying, I didn't give up on this. How dare you give up on this? And he actually takes a swing at him. And there is just so much so much emotion in that. And actually, the scene itself, I've read later, was very difficult for Jared to shoot for that reason, because you're really seeing him rip out his heart. But um, that sense of I'm not going to let you give up was such a core to the Winchesters. And I think that's the foundation of their hope, is that even when they didn't think they could go on, somebody else said, I'll carry you. And that's kind of how it works.
And also that they can have really big explosions of emotion at each other. I mean, like, massive explosions, punching things, knocking each other out, throwing each other to the walls. I mean, they can have that, but it's okay. It is okay if you love someone and care about someone to show that you really have feelings, and it's not, it's not the end of the world if you blow up at them. You can find a way to come back together.
Yeah. Yeah. Hansi, thoughts on that?
Well, I was just saying, like, in this case, it probably is the end of the world, But yeah, I mean, they went through everything in their emotion. I mean, they're soulmates, really. It's, you see that between them. Like, they don't have to even speak, It's like any partnership, where you know what the other one's gonna do or is thinking.
Yeah, I've always thought it's like the hardest thing when you're blowing up at somebody and you're just so angry and you slam the door and you walk out, and it's a big dramatic moment. It takes a lot of guts to turn around, and then you have to walk back in that door and say I'm sorry. And we got to see that with the brothers and the other various people that were in and out of their lives, blowing up at Bobby. And then you have to say, well, yeah, I'm sorry. And saying I'm sorry. People, a lot of times it is so hard to say I'm sorry. And we got to see lots of sorries across all 15 seasons. And that is something that's very hopeful, I think.
Although
that
Bobby
you can have the most, huge, massive conflict between characters or between people and personalities over some really big, deep emotional issues. And yet you can still find a way to come back and swallow your pride and say, I am sorry. So,
well,
we need more of that.
Yeah, and the fact that both of them as young men expressed emotion. They didn't always express it healthily. They didn't always they didn't always use their words, but they got better at it. I just remember I didn't have the Impala to beat on, but when I was very, very stressed out cleaning out my dad's house after he died, there was one time I just took an empty packing box out on the back porch and beat the hell out of it with a broomstick. And I think my family thought I had really finally lost it. They sent my youngest out as a sacrificial lamb to go bring mom back in the house. But I thought about Dean at that moment, and that it was cathartic. And so often in shows on TV, especially where you've got young guys in heroic roles, they're always, no, 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 I got this. Or you don't see the other side of being a hero, which is the price. And Sam and Dean paid that price over and over again in those multiple apocalypses. And instead of getting tough and hardened, they still cared. They still had compassion, even when they were running on fumes. And I think and they had hope. And that's something you don't see in an awful lot of shows. You get the saving people, you get the hunting thing, but you don't get that behind the scenes look at the price of being a hero. And Supernatural showed us that price. What does the term compassion fatigue mean to you? Because I think we saw that in the show many, many times. Kristin?
Oh my gosh, compassion fatigue. I know that like especially when they're, in dealing with Castiel, um, he was so helpless. Sometimes he was so terribly helpless, and it just wore their patience. And other times when they're dealing with yet another crisis, it's like, gosh, can we just have a break at some point? Can we please just have a moment to ourselves? And knowing that they still had to get up and still had to save that person, and they think that they're done with a problem and it comes back again. And I think that that was one of the things that they probably had as their biggest, or one of the biggest challenges, was having to get up and feeling that sense of obligation to go and put themselves out there one more time and deal with something that maybe they just don't want to deal with. They just want to, like when they were in the bunker and Dean, he has his room and he just wants to spend time and not have to go out and save another person who made another crossroads deal. Damn it, can't you just not make a deal? And so I think sometimes that, there was times where they just got frustrated at having to be those chosen people that had to go out and do this because there wasn't really anybody else out there doing it.
Yeah, that curse of interesting times. Hansi?
Yeah, I mean, they had every reason to be angry about, the life that they were forced into, but, and they were sometimes, I mean, basically, they had no spoons left for helping people, but they had enough people around them that, like Bobby and Jody and Donna and Rowena, and, eventually they had accumulated this, Castiel, when he got his shit together, I mean, they still went out when they were exhausted, but they did manage to have a whole group of people with great skills that they could call upon, so it wasn't just them.
And they probably also, I mean, seeing the bad example of some of the other hunters that were just, they didn't care. They didn't care about the people they were saving. They were more like John in a lot of respects. And so I'm sure they felt the added burden of having to step in and take care of things because they know that they're probably the only ones that would care enough to not just vanquish whatever, but save the person too.
Yeah, when I think of compassion fatigue, I remember an article I read. It was right after 9/11 when the Twin Towers went down, and it was the early days. So the first responders still thought there might be people alive in the wreckage, and they had the search dogs out there, but they weren't finding people alive. And the dogs actually got depressed because they weren't finding survivors. And so the first responders, it's going to shake me up, took turns hiding in the rubble so the dogs would get a win. And Sam and Dean are those dogs, so many times they don't get the win, but they need the win to feel like they can keep going. And I think we saw that compassion fatigue many times. There was times when Dean just said, I'm the wrong, don't pick me anymore. I can't do this anymore. I'm the wrong guy. And Sam tried to walk away when he went to Stanford, and they were who they were. So I think that the compassion fatigue is real, but I think that, people like Sam and Dean who feel called to help other people and save people, they give it all they've got, even working through that, because there's hope. And that's the biggest thing. And the Winchesters never really lost hope for very long.
Not even God took away their powers. They were still out there fighting.
That final fight with Chuck by the lake, when he's just slamming them around and they keep getting back up, and he says, quit getting up. And they're bleeding and they're battered and they're leaning on each other and they keep getting back up. And it's kind of microcosm of the show.
Yeah.
So Well, folks, we have run through our time, but please take a moment, tell everybody where we can find you online. Kristin? Sorry.
I guess probably Twitter. So Twitter would be one of the places that I guess you could say, or X.
That thing.
At Anycat.
Yeah.
ANICAT at Anycat. That's about it.
Okay. Hansi?
Hansi Oppenheimer at Squee Projects on pretty much any app. And I have a website too, squeeprojects.com.
And that's SQUEE.
Yes, as in
Squee. And I'm pretty easy to find at gailzmartin.com or at bryce.com on pretty much all the major socials under one or both of those names. So if you spell them right, you'll find me. But most of the time, I'm here on Continual. So thank you so much for a fantastic panel. And thanks to all of you for watching and listening. There will be more Supernatural coming up soon on Continual. So we'll see you online.